August 13, 2025, at Scarborough Shoal. What happens when a Chinese warship deliberately cuts off a U.S. destroyer in international waters? Beijing believes it has successfully demonstrated its power to intimidate the U.S. destroyer. But they made a tactical mistake. They thought this was a one-on-one fight, but in reality they were facing an entire invisible war network, and the trap had closed. What invisible countermeasure turned this confrontation into a cold lesson in military power? In this strategic sea area, the U.S. guided missile destroyer USS Higgins, an Arleigh Burke-class vessel, a modern floating fortress worth $2 billion, was carrying out a simple yet critically important mission: Freedom of Navigation Patrol, or FONOP, in accordance with international law. 8:45 a.m. Inside the Higgins's Combat Information Center. CIC, the atmosphere is quiet and professional. Each sailor is an expert, each screen displaying a piece of the tactical picture. The ship maintains a speed of 15 knots heading 270 degrees, while officers monitor continuous radar signals. The CIC team confirmed the current position 12 nautical miles from the shoal, ensuring compliance with safety distance regulations. But today, that normality was disrupted by a tense approach. Yes, Beijing had a different plan. They didn't just want to test, they wanted to provoke, to rewrite the rules of the game. On deck, the Chinese Coast Guard vessel CCG 3104, a large heavy ship, was approaching from the south, 180 degrees from the Higgins. At the same time, the system also detected a PLA Type 054A frigate loitering to the northeast. The system showed this ship maintaining a parallel course, a move that combat officers assessed as the first step in a potential pincer maneuver. The verification process was swift. Combat officers requested continuous updates on Track 2, and the system confirmed that the frigate's course and speed remained unchanged, indicating a deliberate action. After only 15 minutes, it appeared that the Chinese Navy had received orders as the CCG 3104 abruptly changed course to 315 degrees, accelerating to 25 knots, a clear collision vector. It was heading straight to cut across the USS Higgins. Over the radio, a voice in both English and Chinese demanded departure from the area.
Leave Chinese territorial waters immediately.
This cutting maneuver violated the international COLREG's collision avoidance rules with a safety distance of less than 1,000 yards. But note, they acted individually. Each Chinese ship was an information island, a lone actor in an uncoordinated play. The U.S. Navy does not come and go like that. They are performing their duties in a legitimate international zone. On the screen of the Higgins Combat Information Center, the numbers are updated continuously, coldly, and accurately. The Chinese ship's approach speed is 25 knots per hour. The distance has quickly shortened to less than 500 yards. This was when the AN-SPI-6 radar, the heart of the Aegis combat system, came into play. The system synthesized the seemingly disjointed actions of the enemy into a unified and clear 3D tactical picture. Almost immediately, this information was disseminated and shared with all units of the 7th Fleet via the Tactical Targeting Network, also known as TTNT. Beijing thought this was a game on the surface. They were wrong. At exactly 9 a.m., the American kill chain was activated. The order was clear: elevate the priority of the air combat domain. Immediately, sensor resources were reallocated. Officers in the CIC were assigned to closely monitor the latest air contacts, while automated systems calculated potential interception options. The entire system's focus was now on preventing and neutralizing any threats that might emerge from the air. At an altitude of 60,000 feet, the RQ-4 Global Hawk drone, patrolling its predetermined orbit above the Luzon Strait, pointed its camera towards Scarborough. Its electro-optical and infrared sensors detected unusual activity at Lingshui Air Base on Hainan Island. Multiple fighter jets were being prepared. Immediately, combat officers began the process of cross-referencing and verification, prioritizing the assessment of potential threats from this direction. A new signal appeared on the CIC combat officer's screen marked Classified UF4 VEL3. From its surveillance orbit, the RQ-4 Global Hawk recorded activity at Lingshui Air Base. Specifically, its sensors detected 2 J-10 fighters being prepared for takeoff. This critical information, including images and identification data, was processed and transmitted via a military satellite link integrating directly into the Aegis combat system aboard the USS Higgins in just 10 seconds. As a result, instead of having to deal with a surprise alert once the aircraft were already airborne, The Higgins' Aegis system could now foreknow and place these targets on a high-priority watch list even before they left the ground. The element of surprise, one of the plan's key assets, was completely neutralized. The J-10s took off flying low over the sea at an altitude of 200 feet, attempting to use the curvature of the Earth to conceal themselves. But it was futile. Hundreds of miles east of the Philippines, an E-2D Hawkeye detected them as soon as they left land. The data was immediately shared. 2. FA-18F Super Hornets conducting Combat Air Patrol or EAP received the order. They did not accelerate into the fray. Instead, they established an invisible electronic barrier. In the cockpit of the J-10, the Chinese pilot felt confident, thinking he had achieved something. He was flying towards a lone target. Suddenly, a piercing screech sounded, and his radar warning receiver RWR lit up. He was being illuminated by an extremely powerful radar beam, but there was no target on his screen. He frantically performed evasive maneuvers, but the target lock signal did not disappear. He didn't know that 100 nautical miles away, a U.S. Super Hornet pilot was calmly watching him like prey in his sights. The feeling of being hunted without seeing the enemy caused the Chinese pilot's discipline to begin to waver. Instead of following procedure and retreating, he made a reckless decision. In a desperate attempt to regain the initiative, he made a sharp turn, accelerated, and headed straight for the direction where the RWR system indicated the strongest signal. Next, he performed a high-risk maneuver, activating his fire control radar, attempting to scan and lock onto the ghost that was hunting him. In the cockpit of the Super Hornet, the RWR warning signal immediately changed from tracking to target lock. This was a dangerous escalation, a clear sign of hostile intent. But the American pilot did not flinch. He adhered strictly to the rules of engagement. No missiles were launched. His hand moved calmly, pressing a button on the control panel. Immediately, a series of bright flares were launched from under the wings of the Super Hornet, streaking across the blue sky right in front of the J-10's flight path. For the Chinese pilot, who was straining his eyes to find a black shadow in the sky, the sudden appearance of a wall of fire out of nowhere was a huge psychological shock. It was not an attack. It was a cold and undeniable statement. I am right here. I see what you are doing, and I can end this game at any time. Stop right now. The J-10 squadron's confidence completely collapsed. The squadron was forced to adjust its tactics. Faced with an invisible opponent capable of immediate response, they had no other choice. The aerial element of the trap had been broken not by an explosion, but by a dazzling flash of technological superiority. After a few minutes of futile struggle, the J-10 squadron realized the futility. They were forced to turn back and retreat. The aerial element of the trap was completely broken. This was no longer the isolated action of an overzealous Coast Guard vessel. This was a multi-domain trap. Captain Higgins' response was immediate and decisive. Not only did he react, he anticipated. The logic of modern warfare is clear. Where there is an aerial threat, there is likely an underwater predator. Without waiting to hear the sound of a submarine's propellers, the U.S. deployed the Seahawk in active anti-submarine mode. Triton was requested to assist in monitoring the southern area. The MH-60R Seahawk helicopter quickly approached the suspected area. Upon arrival, it stabilized in hover mode and began deploying the AN/AQS-22 dipping sonar into the deep water. The first active signal sent an unmistakable message. The submarine had been detected and precisely located. For a diesel-electric submarine that relied on stealth, this was the worst possible scenario. Faced with a complete loss of its stealth advantage, the Type 039 submarine was forced to make an emergency dive in an attempt to escape the surveillance zone. This action created a large amount of sudden noise from the propeller's cavitation to the sounds emitted from the hull as pressure changed. All of these characteristic acoustic signals were immediately picked up by the U.S. sonar network, turning the submarine's escape attempt into a clear self-disclosure of its position. This desperate action only made the situation worse. At the same time, the MQ-4C Triton, an unmanned aircraft successor to the P-8 Poseidon capable of continuous 24-hour patrols, began deploying a series of sonar buoys in a pre-calculated matrix. Data from the sonar buoys, the Seahawk and the Higgins AN/SQQ-89 sonar, was integrated into the CIC. They were no longer discrete signals. They formed a 3D firing solution, a position accurate to the meter. The Chinese submarine was now completely trapped. With both air and underwater support options neutralized, the Chinese surface vessel was now completely isolated tactically. This was when they decided to escalate. The ship's fire control radar switched from search mode to target lock mode, pointing directly at the USS Higgins. In the Higgins Combat Information Center, the RWR radar warning system immediately sounded the highest level of alert. Almost simultaneously, a column of water erupted about 500 yards from the ship, a clear warning shot. The Higgins response was almost instantaneous. The SEWIP Block 3 electronic warfare system was activated. Instead of merely emitting passive jamming, this system launched a deliberate electronic attack. It analyzed the frequency and waveform of the enemy radar, then rebroadcast a series of high-power spoofing signals. As a result, the Chinese ship's fire control radar was overwhelmed by countless false targets. For the radar operators, their screens were now flooded with meaningless data, making it impossible to distinguish real targets. Their ability to lock onto targets was completely neutralized. The ship was isolated and lost its primary combat capability. Higgins did not choose to escalate by firing back. Instead, the order was given for a carefully calculated demonstrative countermeasure. Higgins's response was almost instantaneous. The SEWIP Block 3 electronic warfare system was activated, continuing to overload the enemy radar with fake signals, while Aegis calculated the trajectory of the warning shot. Instead of escalating firepower, the order was given for a subtle counterattack. Activate the laser warning system, also known as LR-8, and fire a series of flares from a nearby Seahawk helicopter streaking across the sky right in front of the Chinese ship. The blinding flashes and sharp warning sounds sent a silent message: "We have monitored your every move and can neutralize the threat with absolute precision without using firepower." This was the final link in the chain of destruction, a demonstration of capability rather than an act of destruction. This is the final link in the chain of destruction, a demonstration of capability rather than an act of annihilation. At 09:20 hours, silence enveloped the sea. On the Chinese vessel, the initial chaos now subsided into stunned disbelief at being neutralized. Realizing that any attempt to escalate would be immediately overwhelmed and neutralized by the adversary, the Chinese vessel quickly adjusted, forced to slow down and withdraw from the USS Higgins patrol area. In modern warfare, the speed of information sharing and data processing is more important than the speed of a bullet. This is not a confrontation between individual weapon systems, but a clash between an integrated intelligent combat network and isolated units lost in the electromagnetic spectrum. For the PLA, this was a costly lesson about the limitations of doctrine and underscored the gap in technological integration. For the crew of the USS Higgins, it was just another day on the job, asserting freedom of navigation under international law.